Implementing best practices in Azure Cloud involves various aspects, including security, performance, scalability, cost management, and reliability. Here are some key best practices. Security. Utilize Azure Active Directory (AAD) for identity and access management. Implement role-based access control (RBAC) to enforce the principle of least privilege. Use Azure Security Center for continuous security monitoring and threat detection. Enable encryption at rest and in transit using Azure Key Vault and SSL/TLS, respectively. Regularly update and patch virtual machines and other resources to mitigate security vulnerabilities. Performance. Utilize Azure CDN, Content Delivery Network, for caching and delivering content closer to end users. Leverage Azure Cache for Redis or Azure Cosmos DB for high-performance caching and data access. Use Azure Load Balancer or Application Gateway for distributing incoming traffic across multiple resources. Optimize storage performance by choosing appropriate disk types and configurations. Scalability. Design applications with scalability in mind using Azure App Services, Azure Functions, or Kubernetes. Utilize Azure Autoscale to automatically adjust resources based on demand. Use Azure Virtual Machine Scale Sets for deploying and managing a set of identical VMs. Leverage Azure Database for PostgreSQL/MySQL/Azure SQL Database for scalable and managed database solutions. Cost management. Monitor resource usage using Azure Monitor and set up alerts for cost thresholds. Utilize Azure Cost Management plus Billing for tracking and optimizing costs. Use Azure Reserved Instances for significant discounts on virtual machine usage. Implement tagging and resource grouping for better cost allocation and management. Reliability. Deploy resources across multiple Azure regions for redundancy and disaster recovery. Utilize Azure Availability Zones for high availability and fault tolerance within a region. Implement Azure Site Recovery for disaster recovery and business continuity. Use Azure Traffic Manager for global load balancing and failover. Monitoring and logging. Set up comprehensive monitoring using Azure Monitor for performance, availability, and security. Utilize Azure Log Analytics for centralized logging and analysis of log data. Configure alerts for proactive monitoring and issue resolution. DevOps and automation. Implement infrastructure as code, AAC, using Azure Resource Manager, ARM templates, or tools like Terraform. Utilize Azure DevOps for continuous integration and continuous deployment, CE/CD. Automate repetitive tasks using Azure Automation or Azure Functions. Use Azure Policy for enforcing organizational standards and compliance requirements. Adhering to these best practices helps ensure that your Azure deployments are secure, efficient, and resilient while optimizing costs and enabling streamlined management and operations.